Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Tiger Wolf podcast. I'm Chris.
I'm Nathan.
And we're here again after, it's been almost 10 years since we started the podcast for no good reason at all.
How long has it been since our last one?
Probably like 5 years or something.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. It's funny because we got together and we started like that board game podcast that we'd never released. I think I don't even know where I put the recordings.
Right.
Anyways. So
I don't remember what we even said, so we can do it all again.
Yeah, there we go. I gladly would. So
we could wait 5 years and do our 15th anniversary episode.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea. We'll release one episode and then just wait for 5 years. Hey, everybody, we're back. Everybody's been waiting with bated breath.
What will be the hot new thing in 5 years?
Well, if whatever the hot new thing is, we wouldn't be talking about it. Like you and I don't care about the hot new thing, do you?
No, but
Shogun was the hot new thing for me. That was new thing, and I was right on top of that.
I was thinking like tech, but Shogun's a funny one because it's hot new thing meets old thing that we both like.
Yep.
And so maybe in 5 years it'll be like Pog Bitcoins. Not that Pogs were something we were into before, but
actually maybe that would be really funny. Like if I was to do an NFT project, they would be like Pogs.
Right.
Just something really ridiculous that plays up how bad the whole thing is.
Every individual Pog should be its own NFT, really.
Because how else will you prove that you own the Pog?
That's right. I deviated us away from Shogun, which is probably more of a topic of interest.
Well, yeah, what's funny is we didn't actually sit down and talk about Shogun yet at all. So
that's true.
I thought this was kind of timely to sit down. I mean, our topic du jour is this game that you and I are kind of both like fascinated by. Mm-hmm. Is that the right word? I'm fascinated by it.
Yes. I mean, so ironically, the last time I talked about it was on another podcast, the Open Owl podcast.
Did you really talk about Inindo on it?
Yes. I did, because we were talking about. I actually don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but we came across sort of this idea of open world gaming and some of the challenges behind that.
Yeah.
And I talked about Inindo because it's this game where you can travel around and develop a party, and it's you're meeting other characters and you're developing relationships with them. Yeah. And we're trying to do a little bit of that in another game we're working on for Open Owl, which is my employer. Mm-hmm. But Inindo does a thing that is really hard to do in board games, where it tracks your relationship level for the rest of the game. So that's just like a super fun dynamic that was part of this game that came out in 1990.
Yeah, 91, I think, actually. Yeah. I was looking back. I think 91 was when it was released in Japan. It wasn't released here till 93.
Right.
So, and we only got it on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
Which is really strange because, it wasn't actually reviewed that well. Because I went back to Japanese primary sources about this game, mm-hmm. right? It was originally released on Japanese PCs, so FM Towns, Sharp X68000, PC98, PC88. But when you looked at the reviews for the Super Nintendo version, which I'll get into in a second, but is actually the remake. All the PC versions are different. The Super Nintendo one is Super Inindo. The PC versions are regular Inindo, and they're actually different. You can see with the screenshots, the layout is different. I'm sure they cut out some sort of, stuff that was too risque, because Koei tended to do that. Mm-hmm. There's a scene in Romance of the Three Kingdoms 2 with Dio-chan that's kind of a little spicy, and then she offs herself in it, and so there's a tragedy part in it, and they just totally cut that from the North American versions.
Okay.
But we didn't get it till 93 on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
And so that's the only version we knew.
Maybe we should create a little more context here, because we're sort of diving right into the game, but the game we're talking about is called Inindo.
Way of the Ninja.
And it is set in, I guess, Sengoku era Japan, leading up to 1600. which is a setting and a time that people are probably a little bit more interested in right now because of Shogun.
Mm-hmm.
But Inindo is sort of starts off as you're a character who's part of the Eiga Ninja clan, which is being attacked by Oda Nobunaga. Apologies for pronunciations if I'm getting it wrong. But he is the warlord from that era who is most attributed with doing the hard work that eventually led to uniting of Japan. And I'm struggling a little bit to remember some names, but that game, Inindo, culminates in his assassination, I think, by Toyotomi Hideyoshi. I'm totally screwing that up, for sure.
Yep.
Anyways, a lot of this stuff is kind of the background to the fictional Shogun, which... and
Shogun, like this, is historical fiction. So both of them are a fictional account about history, right?
Yeah.
And about the same era, probably right around the same timeline as well, because it's
very close.
Prior to the Battle of... it's in between Battle of Kowanakajima and the Battle of... What's the famous one where he finally unites Japan and becomes the Shogun?
I should have brushed up on this.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Apologies to everyone who's a... There you go.
Is that right?
Apologies, because we're not like necessarily super experts in this. We're just very interested, passionate fans of the theme.
Sekigahara.
There you go. Yeah. Thank you.
Which is also one of my absolute favorite board games.
Shogun.
Sekigahara.
Oh.
Which is about that battle specifically.
Oh, interesting.
And you're playing as either Tokugawa or the other side, Shido, I think, is the historical.
Not Takeda Shingen.
No, Shengen's long dead at that point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry. I was lost. Shingen is with Battle of Kowanakajima.
Right.
Not later. Yeah.
And Shingen was definitely a rival of Tokugawa. But by the time, Shogun kind of lays this idea out of Tokugawa has started out as almost like a lower kind of ally of Nobunaga early on, and has sort of almost kind of laid it in the weeds a little bit throughout this whole kind of process, and it just has very strategically, slowly kind of built himself up. So by the time 1600 rolls around, he's in a very strong position, and everybody else feels threatened by him, so Sekigahara is sort of the key battle where it's a key battle because a lot of families defected sides and really kind of decided who they would go for. If they were with Tokugawa, obviously believed he would win, or they would be with the Shogun's son. I can't remember exactly. Anyways, this is all kind of the landscape for Inindo, where you are like a solitary ninja who's running around a country that's in the midst of civil war, and all these battles are happening around you. And that's part of what that novel experience was way back when. And in a lot of ways, I don't know that I've seen another game that you run around and you're a single character and there's warfare all around you. And Dynasty Warriors is one thing where you're actively involved in the wars.
Mm-hmm.
In Inindo, you're kind of more it's like a backdrop to what you're doing.
That's what's most interesting about this at the time, because it was the counterpoint to Nobunaga's ambition. And you've got the Nobunaga's ambition style, like God view, where you're looking down at the map and then you're running around in this world, right? Like Final Fantasy style, top down, run around the map. Every 3 days, you're forced to rest if you're just running around the overworld.
Yeah.
And then every 30 days, you see, okay, cuts. And then all of a sudden, you're forced to watch this grand strategy playing out with colors, just like you're playing Nobunaga's ambition.
Right.
Which was fascinating. And to this day, there's still not, that I'm aware of, a game that tries to mash up like a role-playing game a la Final Fantasy, but yet with like a tactical war game style random battle encounter. Like the battle system is really weird, and then mashes it up with a grand strategy game on top of it. Like it is bizarre. It is so unique.
Yeah. Well, mentioning God mode is really interesting because Inindo is primarily a role-playing game, I would say. So you have that first-person perspective, which is more personal. And I think it attempts to shape this story around the very beginning, your village has been attacked, and so you're essentially on a quest for revenge. And
well, in fact, that's actually the Japanese title. The Japanese title is like basically Avenge Nobunaga or something like Revenge, Destroy Him. Like that's actually in the Japanese title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's super interesting to have a first-person perspective in a setting that usually is kind of a God mode perspective, and it's kind of a problem of a lot of games where you are like controlling an empire or you are a king or whatever. Because who are you really in that? Like even if you are the highest-ranking general or king or whatever, you wouldn't normally have like this omnipotent control of like what every single soldier does in your army, kind of a thing, right? So it's a real kind of fantasy, and so
it's every CEO's fantasy. It's
right,
like I've got
exactly.
my HR department, and they're over
right.
here, and then oh no, that one defected. Oh no, they went to the competitor. Hit them with an NDA. No, non-compete.
Write those emails.
But it's funny though because the Koei is very influenced by business. Like what's interesting about Koei's history as a company, right? And obviously, I've been studying it, and I'm not super great at it because it's hard. There's so much there. Like I heard a criticism, I think it was Jason Graves' YouTube video where he's like, this thing hits you with so much Japanese taxonomy, like all these proper nouns of swords, warrior names, places where the caves are in Indo, that you're like, where am I? Who's that? Huh? Yeah. And like, if you're a dumb kid like me, it's like, I don't even know how to pronounce this Japanese because I can't speak Japanese. But it's also kind of part of what makes it so tantalizing. But like the sort of the business side of Koei was always there. Like they released their first two games. One was the Battle of Kawanakajima, which is Takeda Shingen versus the other guy.
Yusuke Kenshin?
Yep. So you've got that one, and then the other one is Investment Game, which is basically a business simulator, right? And that was because his wife was really into stocks. They actually floated Koei by her being an investor for years before. She sold all her Nintendo stock to fund Koei. So actually they could have been much wealthier probably if they had held on to that share of Nintendo, because this was pre-Famicom, like just right around the time of Game & Watch. So they funded this stuff, and then those through lines keep going, right? Like Battle of Kawanakajima later leads on to Nobunaga's Ambition. Investment Game starts to become Aerobiz later. Yeah. And then the role-playing games, those came before as well. Like Inindo has some of its roots in some of the old Koei RPGs, because they tried their hands at RPGs, but with a simulation slant. So you're walking around as a character, but it's always like just full of spreadsheets worth of numbers, just like Inindo is. Right. So it's interesting because it kind of evolves from dungeon and sword and sorcery are some of the games that were really obscure Japanese computer games by Koei.
I'm going to guess, too, that there's a certain confluence of like programming sensibility, because like when you're doing business games, strategy games, role-playing games, you don't necessarily need to go all out on dynamic art. You know, a strategy game is a lot of kind of spreadsheets in a way. There's a lot of information input, and the source material they're leaning on, particularly with like Nobunaga's Ambition, it is a lot of names and locations and items or what have you.
And it was always intentional. Like they started out and they said everything else in the industry in the arcades is for kids.
Right.
So they were seeing this trend of like all this stuff is for kids, and yet there's all these Japanese businessmen who are the only people who can afford to buy computers. So we're going to make games for adults for the businessmen who buy computers.
Right.
And that's kind of their origins, coming from tabletop wargaming into computers.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is like tabletop wargaming is complex. It's full of all this math, but the Koei games go further than that because you can go further with a computer with all this tables of junk. Like he actually made a concerted effort in Nobunaga's Ambition to bring in all the HR stuff. He wanted the business of like managing your resources and loyalty of, that's kind of the roots of that loyalty idea and friendship that Inindo kind of brings into it.
Well, I mean, the game that brought us into Koei is Romance of the Three Kingdoms 2, and in that story, you know, another setting that has a lot of names and is sort of impenetrable for outsiders. Many of the characters who have a famous name in that story are administrators. You know, like it's an important thing to have someone who can govern a province effectively. You know, so there is like you can when you hear the history of Koei, you can see how a businessman would be interested in a story of administrators governing well, amongst all the other drama. You know.
And that's how our CEOs start. So yeah, for this, we're gonna actually try a new structure. We're gonna try like a rubric, if you will. And we're gonna try and go through the game in sort of an organized structure, and just to keep it easy to remember, we're naming it Tiger Wolf, right? And then we're gonna, in true Koei fashion, we're gonna score each element. So we're gonna score on a scale of 1 to 100, just like a Koei general.
How did you think of the name Tiger Wolf?
Romance of the Three Kingdoms 2.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There you go. It means we're trying to rebel.
So just to lay out the first example, tiger starts with the letter T. We're going to cover a theme for tiger first. So the theme we've already talked about. The setting is Sengoku, Japan. It is it's really mid-16th century. And how well do you feel like it evokes that setting for you, the theme?
I love the setting. Like, that's actually the theme in terms of games. It's so rare to have a game where I can run around feudal Japan, right? Like, that's why I loved Legend of the Mystical Ninja, Ganbare Goemon, because I love running around feudal Japan. It's cool. Like, I love the look of it. I love the aesthetic. I love the music style. Like, as a theme, it's great. But I also really like in Inindo how it laces in mythical creatures. Like, there's all these, like, yokai and, like, fantasy, like, Japanese fantasy stuff that's laced throughout it. Like, the Tengu and the...
Giant rat.
Giant centipedes and rats. What are some other bonkers enemies? It is just so off the wall as a theme. There's nothing else like it. It's so weird.
Yeah, I would go as far as to say the theme offers so much promise that it actually outstrips the rest of the game.
Yep.
Because the promise of the game is so enticing. To run around Japan, to influence the Civil War but not be a part of it, to fulfill your quests, you know.
To get powerful, to cast magic, to recruit magicians and sorcerers and Sohei onto your team is like, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it evokes that idea really well in between all the grinding. I don't mean to get ahead of kind of some of the other topics, but when you
I love the way you said grinding right there. It's like there was a particular like enunciation of grinding.
Yeah, well, it just feels like a grind to even acknowledge. But when you are in the theme, I think it does it probably better than just about any other game of its era.
Yep. It was so standout. I mean, the cover, you look at the cover and you're like, I want that. Like, I just remember seeing it. I think the first time I played the game was with my friend Tyler years ago. And I'll get into like some of the discoveries that we made playing it, like because you were on the other side of the lake, I was on this side, you were on that side, right? So I had to keep playing the game because I was so fascinated by it. Anyways,
I mean, I think like there is kind of an 80s North American thing that idealized ninjas, you know, and that's probably part of the hook of this game too. But I think when most people think of games from that era, like they'll think of like Ninja Gaiden or stuff like that. And
Gaiden.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, again, we'll just to preface, our Japanese pronunciation is not very good, so apologies.
Yeah. I've never been.
I'm still practicing. That's why I'm trying to like get into learning Japanese because obviously with all this research, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I need to actually learn.
But I think most of our examples of like kind of ninja culture.
Yeah. Well, because I was super into Ninja Turtles. Like this came out like 2 or 3 years after I finished reading Shogun. Yeah. Right. Like it primed the pump for me. Like I'd actually first come across Shogun as a theme, as a video game. I played the Commodore 64 Mastertronic or Virgin Games video game based on Shogun. Yeah. And that I was hooked. I was like, I am into this feudal Japan thing. It is just So it was the perfect time. And Pizza Cats, I think, came out around, Samurai Pizza Cats was around that era as well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and Inindo captured that feeling better for me than any of the other stuff. So like I was not attracted to like a Ninja Gaiden because Inindo existed. And that was the ninja experience I wanted to have. I mean, it's years later that I kind of read more about what ninjas actually were, and did they really exist as like their own kind of subset, kind of a thing. But when I was in my, I don't know, 12 or whatever, 13, this was it for me.
Oh, and it's just in a theme in terms of when you're walking around the world of Inindo and you're playing it, it's just kind of oozing with this unique oddness. It's got all these unique little places. Like you end up like in the Tengu's cave with these sort of winged creatures, and then you end up in the gold mine and there's ghosts. Yes, I'll give spoilers because chances are most people are not going to play this game. Yeah. Like it is a grindiest grind of all time. But it's got some fascinating theme concepts going on. And some of the music melodies, like the arrangements are pretty grating at times in the music, but it does still come across. Like you get a lot of that vibe. Like when you go into the village and it's this kind of quaint, cozy feeling like feudal Japan music, it's really charming.
So I'm going to grade it kind of against its peers rather than like games of all time. And I'm going to give it 99 on theme.
Yep. I'll give it like I'll dock it a little. I'll go like 95, but pretty high, like right up there in 100. That's why I was so excited about Neo, like the recent like ninja game that actually Team Ninja, the Tecmo side, who made Ninja Gaiden, made Neo, and it's kind of the same feudal Japan fantasy elements. Like really, Inindo is almost like a spiritual predecessor or progenitor of Neo, and Neo was a big hit because it's ultra violent and it's an action game, and so that's much more appealing to a Western audience. Whereas this is very Japanese. Like
hence most North Americans not even knowing it exists. Let's move on to interaction. So this is essentially gameplay, and Inindo has a number of different elements we've kind of alluded to so far. The main thing is that you're running around and it's like a sort of JRPG.
Yeah, it's like if you could imagine in your mind's eye the world's most grindiest, irritating RPG of all friggin' time. That's what this friggin' game is. The cave design is atrocious. It's got some of the most unforgiving, like Jason Graves in his video, he talks about like there's points where you're walking through a cave and then it forces some sort of stupid dialogue box that was like a plot point, but because you're randomly running and it just randomly throws a piece of dialogue up on the screen, you're like, wow, what did that even say? And then you got to go back and then back down because it only triggers when you're moving a certain direction. So if you're going downwards, you see the note and it just randomly pops up and you're like, hang on, was it 3 steps down or 4 steps down with the stupid dialogue showed up? Like the dungeons are horrible. The battling is also horrible. You end up like everything's on a grid, right? So you get a random encounter and you're on a grid and then you battle these monsters and everybody's moving along in sort of a tile system. So you can either battle with a close weapon and you get near or far. So you basically have to equip a sword or whatever in one hand, and then you have to put your like throwing star or whatever in the far slot. But then for the menus are super sluggish. So you have to like wait for the menu to like load all the text graphics onto the screen. So it's really, really slow to load anything, right? So it's like, okay, fight, down, far, who do you want to target? Like, it is just atrocious. And this is what I was getting at with my buddy Tyler. What we figured out was they had this specific controller for the Super Nintendo called the program pad. Do you remember this?
Yes.
So the program pad, you could go, okay, it was made for basically Street Fighter 2 for people who couldn't do Hadouken. Right? And so they're like, hey, you know what I could do with the program pad? I can go
down,
A,
forward,
down, A, left, A.
Yeah.
And so we would just program how to do the far attacks just for Inindo.
That's funny.
We bought that stupid controller just to get through the grind fest, which is Inindo, because we were so into the theme that we wanted to get past the something about it kept us going back. Like it was like an abusive relationship. The other thing that's really bonkers in this game, I don't know if you know this, in the first dungeon, okay, when you leave it, you know how there's this scene? So it's a little bit of a spoiler, but whatever, you're not going to play it, I guarantee. You leave the cave and then it's like, oh no, Nobunaga. Like there's like this sort of little cut scene, right? It's just text and a couple graphics.
Yeah.
Did you know that at that scene, when they show Nobunaga, there's like some sort of RNG. It does a random number generator, rolls the dice, and you get either Nobunaga and he's there in all his glory, looking good, and he's up on the throne, or you get burned Nobunaga, who's burned during the attack on Honnoji Temple.
Right.
Yeah. I can't remember which one's which. One of them triggers the entire game being harder.
Oh, I didn't know that.
The entire game, every single NPC or every battle, every random encounter, every dungeon is harder if you get the hard roll when you leave that first dungeon.
I thought
it is the dumbest thing in the entire universe of video games.
That's funny. I didn't realize that. It's also already the very beginning of the game, sort of alternative history, because the battle or the attack on Honnoji Castle is when he dies, right? But in this version, he survives it.
Yeah.
So. Well, and I was we are stepping on world building a little bit, but I was going to mention that right at the beginning because you are essentially launched right into grinding in the cave immediately in the game.
Yeah.
Which is not a great introduction into the game experience.
Specifically why? Like, and I think it's because I don't remember had I played it before you and then introduced you to it?
I think so.
Okay. So I think what we figured out was you can't recruit another member on your team until level 7. So you have to level up your character to level 7 before you can recruit anyone.
Right.
So what I would then do is when I replay this game, I grind in that stupid first cave, battling rats and centipedes only. Those are the only two monsters in that cave.
Yeah.
And I just walk back and forth for approximately 2 hours. I basically start the game just grinding, walking back and forth, battling stupid centipedes just to get to level 7, just so I can recruit people, just so I can rob them, take their gold armor, sell the gold armor, and then buy good armor.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a thing. It's a hack, but that's the thing about this is like in terms of the way it plays, it's kind of broken. It's kind of a broken mess.
Oh, for sure. And you've kind of outlined why, but essentially, I mean, we've played a bunch of JRPGs from back in the day, and the grinding in this is the grindiest of all of them, really.
But I think it's because of the battle system, right? Like if you play Final Fantasy, you can just hold down the button.
Right.
No problem. This one, you have to actually pick where they are and da-da-da-da-da. Now, I found ways around it. Like one way, if you're ever playing this game, is you move your parties so they're right up the front. Put your strong guys at the front. Put your magician or like a healer at the back. Always have a healer. So get one healer and another tank. So then you have 2 tanks. Put your peeps right at the front. And then the other thing you have to know is like you have to cheese it by basically buying the fire staff, the multi-blade, or sleep bombs, because there's certain items that have magic properties. So if you use the fire staff as an item, it casts Fiero without any MP. And the problem is it's really hard to manage all of your points in this game. Like when you level up like, I gain 2 power, and that 2 power is a massive boost.
Right.
It's not like big numbers. Like everything is increments, right? So if you get a power of 6 up on a level up, that's significant in an Inindo. Whereas like another game, you're like, oh yeah, I got 6 power. I got 6 more hit points. In this one, it's like, holy crap. But you're always running out of magic points, right? So you have to cheese the game by doing, okay, well, these monsters are way too hard. So the only thing I can do is like cast a sleep bomb on them. So I go into my items, use a sleep bomb. And then if they wake up, I use another sleep bomb. But if they wake up, that uses their turn. So the great thing is you can kind of turn cheese it as well.
Yeah.
But you can do it to anybody. Nobunaga and boss, just hit him with sleep bombs.
Right.
And you can take him out.
Yeah.
And it's basically the only way to really get through the game. It's that hard.
Right.
But we should talk about the relationships. I mean,
yeah, I mean, that is definitely a huge part of the interaction. So there's actually two different levels of relationships. One is, as we've talked about, you wander around Japan and you're trying to do quests and stuff. And while you're doing that, you're just meeting monks and wizards and ronin.
Samurai and
yeah.
ronin. Yep.
And every time you interact with them, and you can do, I think, tea with them and ask about rumors that are happening around, they'll give you information, but it also boosts your friendship level or whatever they call it. And if it gets high enough, they'll join your party. And you've alluded to sort of a hack where you get chumps to join your party, you steal all their stuff, and then you kick them out of your party. It's an easy way to make some money. But ideally, you're trying to find, those really fantastic characters. You'll meet like a Hattori Hanzo or somebody who's quite strong, and you do want to have them in your party for when you're doing those tough caves. So that's a really fun dynamic because there's a calendar to the game too. And I'll say, go talk to somebody at an inn, and then go sleep, and then I'll go talk to them tomorrow, or they're gone. Okay, that's too bad. I go to the next town, and they're here again. So they're traveling around even while you're traveling around, which is a really fun dynamic.
That's what I love is like there's autonomous NPCs running around the world, and they all have an agenda. They're like, oh, I'm going to go extract my revenge. Oh, I need a job.
Right.
Oh, I'm over here training. Like sometimes they're at the training dungeon where you have to go train, and sometimes they're at the castle because they're going to join a war.
Sometimes they'll attack you. Sometimes certain kinds of ninjas are natural adversaries to Aiga ninjas, which is like your title character is an Aiga ninja from the town of Aiga. And so you're going to have a harder time making friends with certain kinds of characters. I can't remember if there were certain traits that worked well or poorly together.
It's generally people... I'm sure there's some sort of math table under the hood for it.
Right.
It's because that's how Romance of the Three Kingdoms worked.
Right.
Like it was actually out of 100, there was some sort of like compatibility score, I think. Mm-hmm. And if it was like 0 to 32, it was this of the Three Kingdoms. It was like Kingdom A, like Cao Cao. And then this one is like, oh, it's 33 to 65. And it was just a scale of 1 to 100.
Right.
And then that was sort of pick your allegiance. So I think all of those characters, I'm sure under the hood, have some sort of like allegiance to Oda Nobunaga. Right. And then it's like, okay, well, I really hate this guy because I love Nobunaga. So I'm going to go rob him or beat him up.
I mean, that kind of talks to how your own character can actually have their own allegiances too. So the other kind of relationship you have is you'll go do jobs for other local rulers, other warlords. And the more jobs you do for them, your relationship with them will grow and becomes more likely you'll get more jobs or even recruited into their battles. And so those jobs are like sabotaging or trying to like blow up someone else's food supply or that kind of a thing.
Spying, bringing information back. And of course, the most compelling was joining wars, right? So if you can join a war, it's so rare. Like, have you ever joined a war in Inindo?
I've only managed to do it once because it takes quite a while to build up the relationship, as I recall. Yeah. And then even once you've done that, you need a war to happen with that particular warlord.
But you can do it. Like the way you kind of have to do this is you go to the daimyo and you're like, okay, you're not Nobunaga's fiefdom or whatever they call it. So I'm going to try and build up my allegiance with this daimyo. And the way you do it is you bring them all kinds of like bribery. She's like, here, have this idol. Here, have this, this really rare relic. And then like, oh, thank you. And then they become your friend. And then you're like, hey, why don't you go attack them? So you can actually, near the end of the game, you actually need to do that close to the end of the game because you need to like close in on Nobunaga to get to the final dungeon. Right. So you kind of almost have to get into a war close to the end of the game because get somebody else to attack Nobunaga. Right. Take that. It's not a province. It would be I guess a prefecture.
A castle. Sure.
Yeah. Like whatever the I think it's prefecture in Japanese culture. That would be a province. So you're taking over a state.
And the reason you're doing that is because Nobunaga's territories are gated off to you.
Yeah.
So if you get your friendly daimyos to attack him, then you can create a path, essentially.
And that's another annoying, stupid grindfest thing, is gating everything off. So the way that they sort of gate the game is literal gates.
Yeah.
And you go to the gate, and it's like, no, it's too dangerous for you. You can't go through here. And you're like, ah! But the funny thing is, you can literally get to the other side. You just have to walk all the way around. So you can get to all these places that you're not supposed to get to. Then once you get to them once, then you can cast the wing spell or use a Tengu Wing item to warp anywhere on the map, which is really key because you actually only have 20 or I think it's 30 years to complete the game. So if you're really into this meta thing, which is actually, in terms of the interaction and mechanics of this, is probably the most interesting part of Inindo. It's the meta of running around, getting attacked, making friends, spying to earn gold. Like, if I could turn the time limit off and just do that, it'd be great.
Yeah.
But it's the random encounters and the battles, like the battle system, not the war system, but the battle system is just atrocious.
I mean, even if you want to go run jobs for a daimyo, and he says, go spy on my northern neighbors, you have to literally go run to that castle. Hopefully not getting too many kind of random battles along the way.
And it's usually days worth of time to walk up there, and you're probably like, oh, Nathan needs rest.
Yeah.
Stop, force sleep. Oh, I got attacked on the way up. And you just keep getting interrupted.
That's right. And then you get there and you do the attempt, you get the little graphic, and then you slide down the wall because you failed. So there's a lot of like not guaranteed success behind all this stuff.
Yeah.
And yet, it's still fun. I'm not going to give this particular category a particularly high rating, and that's more of an objective rating than a subjective rating, I think, because when I don't know, maybe have rose tinted glasses when I think about just the grinding that you do. And that's just something we did in games back in the day. Nowadays, I think even like half a generation later, if you think about like what they did with like, say, a game like Chrono Trigger, like a battle system was just way cleaner and way more dynamic.
Only like 3 or 4 or 5 years later.
Exactly. So I can just imagine what they could have done with an Inindo.
Yeah, they did it properly.
Yeah, like Inindo 2 could have been really incredible, because anything they were complaining about, all the grinding stuff, that stuff can be sanded off so easily. They could have cleaned up so much of that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a real shame that we didn't get an Inindo 2, but on an Inindo 1 for interaction, because you're interacting with so many things, I'm going to bump it up a little bit, but I don't think I can go any higher than like 62.
Oh, you're generous. Like I would say, okay, so, well, probably you're generous because of all the
I talked my way into
meta.
The whole time we were having the conversation, I'm thinking like, yeah, this is like a 48. And then the more I talked about it, I just kind of the number kept on rising. So,
because you were thinking about all the fun of like spying and like sabotage his rice. Yeah, fucker.
But it is almost more fun in promise than in actuality, but I still remember it fondly. So
nice. Well, I'm going to go a little harsher. I'm going to go like 45, mainly just because I actually like grindy games.
Yeah.
This is the painful part. I will gladly sit and just grind in Final Fantasy. No problem, because I can hold down the button, auto battle it, no problem.
Yeah.
Right? I don't even need it to be as fancy as Chrono Trigger. I'll go Dragon Quest and just hold down the button. Totally fine. And Inindo, unforgivable. Like the level design, unforgivable. Like so many unforgivables. But then what I would almost like KOBO it. I'd bring it down to like 15. It's so bad.
Right.
But all that meta stuff like bumps it all the way back up.
Yeah, right.
So maybe I'll go like 55. I'll be a little more generous because it's so interesting and unique. The meta thing is so good.
That was kind of the journey I went on too. But our next category, which is graphics, I'm just going to say 25 right now. Like,
it sucks. Bad. We don't need to talk about it. It's horrible. I'll go 33 just to boost it a little bit. I like... If you look at the books, like, look at how great some of these, like, illustrations are. You're like, wow, that looks so cool. Look, they're on a journey. They're in a boat. Dragons and monsters. Like, look at that. Oh,
that was kind of the deal with, like, all video games back in the days. You would get some really sweet covers. And Koei ones in particular, like, I loved the cover of Romance of the Three Kingdoms 2. I loved the title screen, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get in the game and, like, 80% of the generals look exactly the same.
Yep.
And everything's essentially just menus that you're playing,
like, you're playing a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
But it's like a great spreadsheet. Love that spreadsheet.
Sure, yeah.
But like, heck, it could look better.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, maybe that was the top end of what that was available then.
It's just really funny to me because, like, literally the Super Nintendo version we're talking about is the super version of Inindo. This is Super Inindo. Okay, because like the PC versions are worse.
Yeah.
Right. So this is like they've remade it. Like they've released this game on like 6 like different computer consoles. Right. Even the Sharp X68000, a very competent Japanese computer.
Yeah.
And you still get this. You get it. It's like, oh, here's the Super Nintendo version. And what's bonkers to me is that they even released it in North America. I'm like, really? Like,
Yeah.
Anyways.
Well, the funny thing about graphics too is like, it's not necessarily just that we're going from like, we're looking at the artwork on the cover, and then we look at the pixelated art. We're like, oh, obviously the pixelated art is worse, because if I had like a manual from like Super Mario Brothers and I saw like, a drawn out Super Mario, I'd be like, what is this weird drawing? Like, I prefer the pixelated version. So it wasn't always that. Right. Wasn't always that the pixelated version was bad necessarily, but there's something about kind of gray and drab about Inindo and its presentation, and it's almost like too zoomed out a lot of the time, which maybe is functional. But as you're running around, you're essentially this little square almost that's just sort of running around this big, wide open area until you get zoomed into like a battle out of nowhere. So
and it doesn't even do any effect; it just kind of goes into it.
Right?
Like,
yeah.
Well, there's like a weird pixelated effect that happens. Anyways, I do have a soft spot for the font. I know, like, again, people have criticized this font, but I actually really like that font. There's something about that classic, the 2 fonts, like the 2 Koei fonts of the Super Nintendo era.
Yeah.
I kind of love it.
Sure.
So I have a soft spot for that.
What was it about games back then that... So one example I'm thinking of is like Squaresoft would do artwork for Final Fantasy that did not evoke the game whatsoever. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like Final Fantasy VI for sure had like very stylized artwork.
Oh, you're talking about like a mono's art versus what's in the pixelated? Yeah. Well, it's because like that's kind of a long history of them going, okay, how do we turn this into the real? Like they tried,
right?
But it was just really hard to translate that level of detail. Like
Right.
if you've seen a mono piece, it's highly, highly detailed and stylized.
I mean, some of the enemies that were kind of all blown up would give you a little bit of a sense of it, but I don't know. It seems so far removed from what is actually in the game. It was always kind of confusing to me. And a lot of games to me are like, it feels like what the artist did was not in conversation at all with the game. But anyways.
Yeah, a little bit.
That's a little
I
bit.
mean, a mono is kind of like that, but.
Sure.
Yeah, so now the E of Tiger, engagement, like how engaging is it? Like character interaction, storyline, how strategic it is. I mean, this kind of dips into the same thing that we kind of touched on with interactions. So like, it's kind of mid, I'd say, as the kids would say. It's a little bit mid. Yeah, some mid levels of engagement.
Yeah, I mean,
the meta is what saves it.
The meta is what saves it. The good parts that I gave interaction really are probably in the engagement side of that.
Yeah, so why don't we do that? We'll say the meta is in the engagement and the other part's in the interaction. Because then we can be like, oh yeah, 45 or whatever I gave the other one. That's fine.
Yeah. I mean, ironically, a big chunk of this game is about going in caves and kind of furthering your quest. That stuff I'm not really engaged with whatsoever.
I just want it over with.
Exactly, yeah. So there is a fair bit of stuff in the game that you're kind of just doing to move past it. So that does hurt it, but...
And it gets worse at the end, actually. Like once you get to the left hand of the map, because basically for the first half of the game, you're only on the right half of the map of Japan.
Yeah.
Right? It's not until like basically hours in that you finally get to the other side. Once you get to the other side, it's nowhere near as compelling. It's really interesting because there's not like a lot of interesting little like side areas to go to. It's not like, oh, here's the cool gold mine with the ghost. I got to save the guy. And over here is I got to go to, I don't know, the poison snakes in the cave of the southern island or whatever.
I wonder if they ran into that development trap where they had a lot of big ideas early on in their development and did a lot there and then sort of ran out of time as they're working on the second half.
Maybe. It kind of feels that way a little bit to me. So, because the caves aren't as interesting, but yeah. So like the meta is awesome. So like the meta for me is like nothing else does it. So I rate it really, really highly. So if we're doing that, yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to bump interaction down to what I was originally thinking, like 48. And then engagement, I'm going to bump up to like... So what I'm actually engaged with in the game is almost, you're saying the meta, and it's like the meta that I create myself in my head in a way, like going to different places and meeting these characters and building relationships with daimyos. I'm almost creating, it's a player-driven story that's going on, and that's super engaging for me.
Yeah.
So there's a story that the game is laying out for you that I'm ambivalent about. So it's hard to rate because I'm like, there's two extremes going on. So I'll probably go like 70. My favorite parts of it would be like 90, and my least favorite parts would be like 40 on this particular category. But so I'll go with 70.
Yeah, I'll go like 80.
Yeah.
Like I really love the meta. Like I love it so much. But that meta gets dragged down by everything else.
Yeah.
Because you have to get through these stupid dungeons.
Right.
Actually, even doing the meta, you're like, well, I can't quite do this thing yet because you have to be at level 10 before you can accept jobs. But if I just level up a little bit more, then I'm more likely to get jobs and succeed when I spy. So I'll just level up a bit more. Oh, but if I level up if I get this dungeon done, I'm going to get battle magic. That means when I'm on the battlefield and I'm playing like a Nobunaga's Ambition style grand strategy war thing, I can cast magic and summon a dragon or a tiger on the battlefield. How cool is that? Yeah, I want to summon a tiger. Of course I do. Destroy it all. Ha ha.
It's almost like the first taste we had at the premise of like open world role playing, plus like even like current open world role playing doesn't have like battles you take part in as like a general figure who commands troops and things.
Yeah. I think they tried to revisit that a little bit with the whole Dynasty Warriors Empires thing, where they're like, okay, here's Dynasty Warriors, now let's slap on some strategy.
Yeah.
So it kind of almost is the same conceptually, very different execution. But.
Yeah, and I really didn't play very much of this at all, but Romance of the Three Kingdoms 9, I want to say, you can actually play as a singular figure who builds relationships with other generals and then joins. You kind of work your way up to if you want to becoming like a ruler in that game. So it does have that kind of dynamic as well. And it has your stats can grow as well as you sort of level up. So there are, I'm sure, some learnings from Inindo that showed up in other places, but nowhere kind of captured the idea or premise nearly as well as this, which is a shame because this game feels so raw.
It's the thing that I keep going back to it, like an abusive relationship. I keep going back to Inindo. I'm playing it again.
Well, I think that's a good time to talk about replayability. Then.
There you go. It shouldn't be replayable, but somehow it is. And it goes back to this meta, because each time you play it, it totally randomizes who you meet. You get different NPCs running around each time you spin up a game.
Yeah.
And then their relationship with you is probably RNG'd, so everything's under the hood is random number generator. Your relationships always start at like 0, so you have to work up every relationship. Well, except for certain ones, like the annoying Aiga ninjas that always want to be on your party. Like you're constantly being like stalked by hermits and Aiga ninjas. They're like, please, I'm Tapioca or whatever my name is. Please recruit me. And you're like, no, I already stole all your stuff. Get out of here.
Yeah, right.
Like, you steal their stuff and then they keep trying to find you to join your team. You're like, no. You're not going to have anything good anymore, because then you steal their stuff. They go and level up a bit, and then you can tell they've like earned more like items back, so they've gone out and battled and earned some money, and then they've got some really crappy items on them now, so like you almost feel bad but you're like, why am I feeling bad about this? It doesn't even matter, but I feel bad that I robbed the guy of his gold suit. Now he's like, just got a cloth garb or something.
It would be funny if they came back and said, give me back my stuff.
Yeah. Like if you did this game, that's what's so great about it, is like it just sparks imagination. It's almost like A New Hope with Star Wars. You're like, it's full of flaws.
Yeah, right.
But it's so compelling that you just can't help but want to like watch it and dream of how you could fix it.
Well, I think that's why when I take a break from the game, I almost always just start over again, because that process of building in this game is a lot of fun. As opposed to like starting partway through and maybe forgetting about what cave I need to do next. And maybe I've already kind of burned through some of the potential characters who I would be friends with, but I've taken their stuff already.
Oh, what would you rate it like for replayability for you?
I mean, it is a game I also continue to go back to, so I have to say it's pretty high. I can't. It's it's a game that in a way, I can't really recommend to people, but I can recommend to myself to keep going back to. So I'm going to say 75, which is, I don't know. I feel like on some days I might say 90, and some days I might say a really low number. But I'm going to go with 75.
I'll go 69 just for fun.
Oh, nice.
Keep it saucy. Yeah. World building, because we kind of touched on this a little bit, but like...
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes to what I was saying before about the player-driven narrative. Like, the world building is really good in that the wider you cast your net, the more characters you meet. It is actually quite exciting when you meet like a character who is actually good. And all of a sudden you're the one pursuing them.
Yep.
And they're like, leave me alone, maybe because like there's no guarantee they want to talk to you or have tea with you or whatever.
But you can just keep hitting the button, just
Exactly.
spam, talk. Go away, I'm busy. Go away, I'm busy. Go away, I'm busy. It's like Dragon Quest in the first one was like, dost thou love me? You're like, no, but thou must. Dost thou love me? No, but thou must. And you just keep spamming the button until they eventually become your friend. It's how you should do relationship, really.
It reminds me of one of my favorite spams from Romance of the Three Kingdoms 3, where if you get an advisor who is 100 intelligence, it means that they are never wrong, which, that's what that means when you're perfectly intelligent. You're never wrong. And you go to recruit someone, however unlikely, and your advisor says, no, they're not going to do it. And you keep on just not doing it until the advisor says, yep, and then you get them. Because the advisor's not going to be wrong, so you know that you're going to get them.
Yep. Which is tremendously satisfying.
Yeah, it is. So you basically just go get every great general in the game because you have a guarantee. And however, you're as likely to get them as you're willing to be patient, essentially.
Totally.
Yeah. So it is kind of fun spamming that stuff. But in terms of world building in this game, I think there is a really cool thing where the world literally opens itself up through stages. And that's the reason why it's, you're willing to kind of suffer through the grind and suffer through caves that are sort of whatever. Because when you're done that, you've literally opened your world up some more. More characters, more daimios to meet, that kind of stuff.
I almost have a theory that if you could update this game even just to put in general art from, like, because we were fascinated with Romance of the Three Kingdoms 2, and all it gives you is like general art, no description, and just some stats.
Yeah.
And then with just that, and how loyal they are to you or whatnot. Like, this person is an idiot. They always get lit on fire, like in battles, or this one always betrays you. Like Lubu always betrays you.
Yeah.
You kind of make up the story.
Yeah.
It becomes this emergent thing. Like, I almost feel like with Inindo, if you were to slap on the general art when you go to visit a daimyo, or have like general art for every character that you meet, and it's not just a generic, you're a Ronin, you look like this. You're a samurai, you look like this. You're a swordsman, you look like this. I feel like it would make it somehow even more immersive just with that tweak.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, I mean, it'd be super cool if, like, a lot of the later games, like, for example, in Nobunaga's Ambition, I don't even know the number. There's one from like 5 years ago that I played a little bit. And in that one, you can have like conferences and stuff.
that's Sphere of Influence, or...
That sounds right.
Anyways,
I don't remember.
there's so many. That's the problem, is it's unforgiving to get into Koei. Like,
Yeah.
it's just like, where do I start with this? And like,
Right.
is this going to be another Warriors game, like another Muso game? There's
Yeah.
so many Muso games now.
Well, exactly. I mean, and of course, those make a lot of money. And I think those two, like, as it went along, they created more of this idea of like winding paths for your character. So if you were one of like a Tiger General or whatever, you don't necessarily follow that character's biography. You make choices that maybe kind of deviate. But you can see in a lot of the games they tried to sprinkle in this idea of you interacting with the NPCs in different ways. You have conferences or like
Tea ceremonies, or
tea ceremonies in Nobunaga's Ambition 2, I think, or like in Romance 4, you would host like meetings. You get advised. Aerobit Supersonic, you'd have like a board meeting and people tell you where to invest. So like all that stuff is like really mechanical and silly in a way, but it also does feel like you are actually having relationships with these people. And if someone says something you don't want them to tell you, you're like, shut up, you.
You have this emergent lore that somehow that comes up through it, right? And Inindo takes that to the next level because it also has fantasy elements.
Right.
So I like the idea that there's like, the legend of the Tengu. And you're like, what's this? It's dangerous. Don't go in there. Like, what is it?
Yeah.
And you're meeting all these like, battling yokai and stuff. Like it's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So the world building really works with using some really simple tools, I would say. It's hard to know exactly how much credit to give the game, I guess, and how much is us, because as you say, one of my favorite examples is just how excited we were when we discovered like a new general in Romance of the Three Kingdoms 2 that had a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pick up some kind of general, and then a new rolls around like, Ling Kao has a son named Ling Tong. That's cool. And he's not useless. This is great.
Yay! And he doesn't have a generic avatar. Fantastic.
That's even better, yeah. So, yeah, those little surprises that pop up, the game gets credit for. I don't know if Inindo has a ton of like that kind of stuff specifically, because it is sort of the same. The mechanisms of interacting with the world building, you've kind of experienced more or less what you're going to experience early on.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the variety of it, I guess, expands as the game goes. So, I don't know. I want to give it a high rating just because I enjoy the world so much.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know how much of it is them setting it up at the beginning, and how much of it is like me, kind of like my imagination running wild.
Yep.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it blends in this case, like, it's kind of going to tread into the lore territory a little bit anyways, right? So I think the world building of it, I don't know. Yeah, this is a hard one. Because it's hard for me to separate, like I've seen all the Japanese guidebooks, right? And the comics and sort of the art and the intro. Like it's actually worth watching just once the intro video that you don't see unless you just let the title screen, like, do you know what I mean? Like there's this little, like, it's got unique music, like it teaches you about the story you wouldn't know unless you watched that. So I think that actually is good, but it's bad in the fact that it's optional. Like a lot of people will just completely skip that, never see it.
Right.
And it does actually set a little bit of the tone of who this woman is who comes to you later and goes, hey, finally, we're reunited. I should join your party. And you're like, I've already got people in my party. Get out of here.
Right.
Like you kind of tell this random woman to go away.
Right.
You don't know if she's powerful or anything.
Right.
If she joins your party, you suddenly instantly lose the other person and all their gear. Anyways, but if you watch the intro video, you kind of get more of it. So I'd say the world building is kind of like in the middle. Like I think the world of it is great, but I'd rate it higher on lore than I would on, because lore is like, this is the implied environment. So in terms of how they built the world within it, I'd say probably a little bit lower for me than the lore itself.
Yeah, as I'm thinking about it, I think of the world building in this case as the sandbox they've created, I think. And they've created a really compelling sandbox. Like, I think that's the thing I want to keep coming back to. It's what the theme lives within, is that sandbox. So I think I'm going to go pretty high. I'm going to say like 86, I think.
I'll go 80. Yeah. What about how originality? Like, this is where I would rate it. Personally, I'll spoiler. I'll just rate this really highly. I think it's highly original. Like, there's just nothing else like this bloody game.
Yeah.
There's too many. I mean, it's kind of like going to a restaurant where they've given you a menu and they're like, would you like Vietnamese food or Japanese food or sushi, or would you like chicken feet? And it's all on one menu. And you're like, what? Why is this all in one place?
Yeah.
So I think that actually is a bit of a downer on it, but it's also so original that I can't fault them for being brave.
Yeah.
It's actually really innovative.
Right.
Because it's so bonkers, and it's on the Super Nintendo.
Right.
There's nothing on the Super Nintendo like this bloody weird game. Like, nothing is like this. So originality, I'm going to give it like 95. It is really high on the originality. Like, there's nothing like this thing. It is so weird.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, if you consider the ambition of making a game that is, again, like a role-playing game, but exists in this huge sandbox, in this strategy game that has like relationships with other characters. Like it's such a weird medley, like it's like trying sushi for the first time, and you're like, seaweed and rice. Oh, this is actually really good. And nobody else, there's no other meals like this. Yeah, somehow it works. So I also would go really high for originality. Like I can't think of another game that's combined these elements in this way, and it's the reason why it's so disappointing we didn't get a second game of it, because the things that bring the game down are all very fixable. But that original premise is golden, and unfortunately we didn't get to iterate on that. So I also would go high. I'm going to say 92. What did you say?
Oh, I don't know. I don't even remember. I had to go back and listen to the recording.
Sure.
I don't want to I think it was like 95, like pretty
Okay.
high.
Yeah.
Like just nothing else like it. It's just, I can't say enough of that. Like, it's just oozing with style. Like it's just so like beautifully interesting.
Yeah, it's a huge reason why I certainly return to it, is just because there's nothing else that scratches the itch. And every once in a while, like Evo would be like another one in a way that is a game that is a very unique premise. But I've seen like kind of other riffs on that idea of like evolving kind of thing. But Evo has its own kind of unique kind of feel. So when I want that feeling, I go there. When I want what Inindo provides and nobody else does, it's time to play it again.
Yeah, like this is one game that I almost feel like the Stardew Valley guy did about Harvest Moon.
Right.
Like he's just like, I want another game like Harvest Moon for Super Nintendo.
That's a great point.
I don't want the other Harvest Moons. I want the Super Nintendo Harvest Moon.
Right.
Because I like these things about it.
Yeah.
And when it comes to Inindo, I'm like, there's no other game that's like that for me. Like if I was going to pick a game to remake or do a spiritual successor to, for whatever reason, it's this one. Because it's so... It's like peanut butter and banana toast or something. You're like, what the heck? Why? Oh, actually, it's not bad. Like you're just kind of surprised by it. Like,
would you make it an MMO?
I don't know. Like these days, I'm sort of like, there's too much. I kind of like the idea of just making a just nice little package, like not MMO. It's just like, here's just a.
How Gen X have you?
Yeah, I'm feeling a little bit like more retro. Like I would love to make it look like Octopath. Like I'm so excited about the Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D.
Right.
Like I would love to make an Inindo
Yeah.
HD 2D style. I would almost be tempted to throw away the tactical nature of the battles, even though it hurts me inside a little bit, because I love like Shining Force, right?
Right.
As I know you do too.
Yeah.
So it hurts me inside a little bit to go, let's throw away the tactical thing, but also like I just need the battles to like just, if you're going to grind, I'm fine with grind if it's interesting or fast. Anyways, but yeah, like, you know, maybe make the battle more like Chrono Trigger or something that's, and really ramp up the mystical, like give me more dragons and Tengu and yokai. Like I fill the world with that stuff.
Well, I think the reason why my mind goes to MMO is because of the whole relationship aspect, and it would be really fun. But I mean, the thing about an MMO is how unreliable that aspect is. So, yeah, I mean, it is nice having a closed experience for the fact that it is more controllable. But yeah, it'd be super cool to. I mean, now that you said Shining Force, I'd be like, oh, it'd be super fun to just like have daimyos that are essentially recruiting parties to fight their battles for them, and at certain
and then do the Shining Force style battle, like when you join, like
have them build like
campaigns
essentially. Yeah, that'd be super
Oh,
fun.
I'm already in. Sign me up. But yeah, like lore wise, on to the next one. Sort of backstory, the inclusion of the clans, the sages. Yeah, I mean, I think that is the most compelling part of the world building, right? It's not necessarily the writing. Although there's some interesting stuff in there. Like there's this one part, I don't know if you got to this optional quest that's early on of getting Yoshi's sword. where you have to go into this like optional cave and go battle.
That rings a bell.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I did it a long time ago, but yeah, it rings a bell.
Yeah. Anyways, it's good lore. I like it.
How
I'd rate it
much-
pretty highly. I would say like 90, because again, it's this universe of Nobunaga's Ambition. You finally get to be in it,
Yeah.
right? Whereas like Nobunaga's Ambition, you're actually just kind of over it because you're in this god view. Okay, here we go. Now I'm managing all my HR reps, right? Hey, everybody, here's some goals. Stay loyal. Oh, here's a raise. Oh, behead him. He's an idiot.
How much of it is you carrying lore into it? Because like for me, especially now, I've spent hours on Wikipedia pages. I've watched Kurosawa. I watched a Kurosawa movie not that long ago about Takeda Shingen. I don't remember what that one's called, but it was great. But there's like a lot of stuff we bring into these settings now, right? Because
I count it as part. It gets to be part of it. Like the historical fiction, I think you can hand wave it, and say like, really, this part of the lore. I mean, that's just me.
Yeah.
Because it's historical, you can't separate it from that.
Well, and this, as you said, this game is its own historical fiction. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Right off the bat, they've already changed the course of history when Nobunaga survives the assassination attempt. So,
and the timeline might be weird there too. Like I don't
Right.
know if it's at the exact date that would have happened, because I think Shingen is still alive in this. I think he's one of the daimyo. Is Takeda Shingen. Anyways, so in timeline might be warped around as well, and
Right.
fictionized.
could be, yeah. So, I mean, in a way, there's like a freedom in that, and that all plays into this idea that it's all kind of a vibe in a way, and so that is also what you bring into it too. Like if you love samurai culture, if you're fascinated with ninjas and stuff, when you play fast and loose with history, you don't even really need to know all the facts, because then, if you want to play this game and call out all the inaccuracies, fine. I mean, that's probably not the game for you, particularly since you're going to be fighting, weird creatures in caves and stuff. So, so the reason I'm asking, I guess, is just to try to figure out where does the credit go. I guess if you set a game in this time frame, and even if it's a fantasy game, I'm going to enjoy the lore just because I enjoy that time in that setting. So, yeah, I mean, I'll say you get 70 as a default just for setting it there, and then I'll give it an extra 10 points because of the work the game did. So I'll say 80.
Yep, it's a good score.
Highly scientific process.
Yep. Yeah. Wow, this is what we're all about, is science.
That's
This
right.
is pure science, completely objective, because science is objective, just like us.
Maybe we should have been writing these down so we can figure out the score. After a while, we can know which game is the best general.
Scientists don't write anything down. What are you talking about?
I think they do.
Yeah,
I think that's called the process.
But okay, so in terms of the process, is the game fun?
Yeah. Question mark.
Is it?
Well,
Is it fun? Like, this is the thing. I've beat it like 6 times,
really.
and I'm still like, is it fun?
Well,
It's like, why am I playing this damn thing? Like,
I know.
I put it on, and I'm like, this is so broken and so irritating and so aggravating, and I love it. What is wrong with me?
there's so much around the game that is fun, but the core mechanics of it, the core engine of it, is bumpy.
Oh yeah,
So yeah, I mean, ultimately, this is like what I said earlier. For me, it's fun. I wouldn't recommend it to people,
yep.
but for me, it's fun.
It is totally the game your weird uncle would play. Like, it's kind of like, what is this thing?
Yeah.
What are you playing?
If I showed this to my nephew, he would be like, "What?"
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, our youngest was fascinated by it. She's like, "Oh, that's that," and she was like memorizing what all the monsters were. I'm like,
that's
"Oh,
fun.
okay. Well, it's interesting enough to, a preschooler or a elementary schooler." So,
Yeah, I mean, I think like there was a huge you use the word meta, almost like crossover feel to it. I think that was the original hook for me, right? So we had already played Nobunaga's Ambition. I'm almost sure of it. And
I think this was just before Lord of Darkness, or maybe right around the same time.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, but
Yeah, I don't know if
because when we first played Nobunaga's Ambition, I think we actually played the remake of,
Right.
of Nobunaga's Ambition. It's really hard to keep track of the Nobunaga games. It's
Right.
bonkers.
I think you're right, and I think, I think at that particular time too, all of it was sort of mythology in a way because like I didn't know enough to like separate any of the characters. Really, the only character I knew by name was Nobunaga himself, and a couple of others like Takeda Shingen or somebody. So to have this other game that also lived in the same world that directly interacted with like characters from that game, there was like this sort of exciting, almost like a Marvel movie where Iron Man shows up in someone else's movie, like that kind of idea.
You get the ensemble. You're like, yes.
Yeah. So like that was always kind of the hook, and it was enough to kind of get me. I think I was so infatuated with it, didn't even occur to me that the gameplay wasn't great until I had played it a lot, and then finally I was like, man, I'm in this cave for a long time dealing with a lot of rats. What this doesn't seem like what the game should be.
Yeah.
But
well, and you feel like it's going to get better. You're like, oh, maybe it's the first cave, right? And then you go through cave after cave of punishment.
Yeah.
Of utter grindy punishment. And that part, going through the caves, is not fun. Random encounters, not fun.
But I think by the time though I had taken the blinders off to see that, the game already had its hooks in me, so it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah. But the meta is fun. Like it
totally
is
fun.
So fun to like find people, figure it out, like hear the rumors at the tea shop, talk to the tea person. They're like, oh, I heard a rumor over there, and then you're like trying to figure out where you're trying to get that one like samurai on your team or a swordsman or whatever because they're powerful.
Right.
I got them up to like, whatever 50 in our relationship, and then they took off. And you're like, damn it, where'd they go? And then you're like, go to the seer. Where'd they go? Oh, they went to there. And then suddenly you're just off on some like sinewy quest to like go find this person in the barrel or the bowels of some cave somewhere because they're off.
And before you know it, you're way far away from where the quest you're supposed to be doing.
And you can't keep track. Like everything is generic, so you don't know where the hell you are. You're like, which cave was it? Which one of the mountains? Was it Mount Ordeals or Mount, what's it? Like, is it Mount Fuji that I'm at?
We'll talk to the daimyo over here, see what's going on.
You just totally get lost.
Yeah.
You can get so friggin' lost in this game.
But those rabbit holes are definitely part of the fun. And you do kind of, in a way, again, you end up in a part of Japan you haven't been before. And you start building the relationship all over again. It's a different kind of a grind. But that's, that is the fun part. So, it's in a lot of ways, that crossover idea is the same thing with Dynasty Warriors when they first did it. It was like, in a game like Romance of the Three Kingdoms, you are just the ruler, and then you have your generals and stuff you run. And then they released Dynasty Warriors, and it's a fighting game. And then they released Dynasty Warriors 2, and it's like, oh, I get to be Zhang Fei, and I get to like run around in battle and do stuff. This is cool.
Oh yeah, like 1 versus 1,000.
Yeah,
like that actually fulfills a core fantasy of being a powerful general.
Totally.
Like when that came out, that was like, whoa, yeah. And then they just did it to death.
They did, but I would say even within that original premise, it was always way more limiting because eventually, just playing that game, you're like, oh, this is really all this is. I'm just hammering the circle button or whatever it was.
Yeah. Hack and slash, baby.
Yeah. And like the first time I played it, I got hours out of it, no question. But eventually when the scales came off there and I was like, oh, this is all this game is, it didn't have its hooks to me like the same way Inindo does.
Yeah.
When I was like finally kind of like ready to assess Inindo for what it is and be like, oh, this gameplay is actually pretty clunky. It didn't matter. There's so many avenues in that I was not willing to let go of. So the fun factor here for me is way more durable than a Dynasty Warriors. So for fun, I'll say 74 ?
Okay.
I don't know. It's kind of not necessarily why I keep coming back to the game, is like the fun of it. But
I love that. I don't know why I really want to play it. Why? Is it fun? Well, that's not why I keep coming.
Yeah,
it's not the fun.
I mean, it's like why does someone go work out, right? Like, it's not necessarily fun to like grind through a workout, but it's like afterwards you're like, oh, I'm really satisfied with that.
So is Inindo like doing like lunges or something? Like,
Yeah, that's right.
is it like going to the gym and you don't want to do it, and then you've done it and you're like, yeah, I feel better about something. Like, do you walk away?
It is hard work.
It very much is. I'm going to be a little bit harsher. I'm going to say like 67. Again, I've beat the game like 6 times. I have evidence. I put it up on our YouTube channel. I just filmed it with my phone. I was like, look, there's the ending, because I actually got there. It really feels like if you get to the end of this game, you feel proud because like, I did it. I got through that grind fest.
Yeah.
It is the grindiest game in the world, actually, I think. I don't think I know a grindier game.
What about like Eye of the Beholder?
That game just sucks. I mean, that game is just a horrendous pile of garbage. Like, you know, people were like trying to collect copies of. Did you ever hear about the Shaq Fu thing? That there was like this website that was like the cult of Shaq Fu, where they're like, we need to make sure that Shaq Fu is eliminated from the world. Please send all copies of Shaq Fu to us so we can destroy them.
like E.T.?
Like, it was just somebody who was just like really had it out for Shaq Fu. They're like, this game is horrible. It needs to be burned.
Was it
that's how I feel.
Game?
I would start that for Eye of the Beholder. Because it is.
It was just a grind, as I recall. That's all it was.
What, Eye of the Beholder?
Wasn't it?
A never-ending dungeon crawl.
Yeah.
But not like a compelling one like Might and Magic was. Like, it was just,
you're literally in
stuck
hallways.
in a bloody dungeon the entire time. Let's run around hallways. This is fun. Oh, it's so bad. And it's like the D&D license, too. You're like, this is like just
You got to start somewhere.
blight.
I remember playing that on your Commodore 64. That's going way back.
It is not good. It is a piece of work. Yeah, so there we go.
Are we done?
I think that's it. One thing I didn't really touch on, I mean, I touched on it, but the game, when it was reviewed on Super Nintendo, the Japanese are actually famously not very negative about things. Like, if you read reviews or watch stuff, like, they'll be like quite positive, even if the game is just totally trash. Now, there's some exceptions where the game is so trash that there's a term for it. I can't remember what it is.
Garbage.
Yeah, not good. I've got this guidebook. It's like the SoftBank guide. I've got 3 of them. So there's 3 editions, and they're like, it's a complete compendium of every Super Famicom game, and then a rating for each one. Inindo is one of the lowest rated games in there. Like, it is really low. I think it's like 50-ish out of 100. And they're really positive about all these other ones. But, yeah. Interestingly enough, actually, Chrono Trigger gets like a 65 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't actually revered back then, which I think is really interesting.
That is surprising to me. I mean, for an Indo, I'm not surprised because
It's
for
a
most
broken
people,
mess.
yeah, I mean, for most people, your first impressions are going to be things like gameplay and graphics
And music. You'd be like, great, you know, is it fun? Does it look good? Is the music good?
Yeah. So.
And it's like, nope, kind of. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I find the music quite charming. I actually really wish there was a good arranged version of it.
Right.
Because the arranged CD soundtrack, which I have there, right? I'm sitting next to the with Soundware edition of the FM Towns edition of Inindo. And, you know, the Super Nintendo soundtrack is grating as all heck, right? And you listen to it, you're like, oh, the sounds. Like, some of them are like, no. And the arranged soundtrack isn't even any better. There's like ones where it's got these like, and you're like, what is that weird instrument? It's like, they've picked some goofy instruments on it. I'll have to like insert some clips into this podcast so you can experience the magic of some of the score, the arranged version. It's not good, but I love it. I still love the soundtrack, and I wish there was a good arrangement of it that feels like authentic feudal Japan.
Yeah. I'm sure
I still yearn for it.
That would help people get past that sort of first level of experience in the game, because the promise is so interesting. And maybe this is a better subject for a different day, but I was kind of thinking about, like, obviously I'm deepest into the world of board games. Is there a board game equivalent to this, and what would it look like? And I mean, there isn't really, but there's kind of an interesting thing in this that we've touched on where, you know, you are like a singular character. You're running around a setting, and there's a war happening. And if you play a game like Root, which is a game of like animals in a forest, but it's It has a very kind of cute veneer, but it's actually quite vicious. And you can play as, usually you're playing as different factions who are fighting over domination of the forest, essentially. But you can play as a single raccoon. I'm trying to remember what they call it. The vagabond, I think. And he is kind of on his own little like side quest, while everybody else, like the cats and the birds and everybody, are fighting it out in the forest, and they've got soldiers running around and doing stuff. There's this one goofy little raccoon who's kind of having his own experience.
That sounds like my jam right there.
Well, that's the funny thing, right? Like, I think this is in the core box. You have 4 different factions. One of them is kind of like Robin Hood and the Merry Men. Like, they're trying to like have little rebellions. One is like the birds are like the old monarchy, and they're like kind of caught up in their old systems, and you have to kind of navigate that in order for them to run effectively. Mm-hmm. The cats are the current power, so they just have the most soldiers, and they're just trying to build and produce and overwhelm everybody else. And so the raccoon is like this really kind of fun idea, because it is like that promise of a ninja. You're like, oh, I can run around, and the raccoon does have relationships with other factions and stuff, and it's a super cool idea. But similar to, I think that captures the imagination of a lot of people. Similar to Inindo, the gameplay doesn't quite come off. And what's also unique about Root, I should mention, is that every faction, including the Vagabond, has their own rules. Like, they all function entirely differently. Mm-hmm. They have a structure that they exist within that's the same. Like, they have steps they have to follow, but how they do it is totally different. And so, but there's like this romanticized idea of like, oh, I want to be the sort of a lone gunman, or, you know, a lone.
And you almost, with that, you can't do it without the other mechanics happening, because that's what kind of almost makes it interesting.
Right.
Right. Like, that's the Inindo factor, is that it's this sweet and sour.
Yeah.
Like, it's the sweetness of being the lone vagabond, but without the macro happening, mm-hmm. It's not actually quite as interesting. Is that sort of the same for you? Like, does it feel like that?
Well, I think the fact that it's so reliant on a macro that's willing to engage with you mm-hmm. makes it fragile, which is, I think, a feature, not a bug of the game. But if I'm going to be the vagabond, like, and you're the cat, say, I need to have a good relationship with somebody in order for me to play well. If everybody kind of ignores me, then I'm really on my own, have my own experience, and I'm probably not having a super effective game. Mm-hmm. So, because I need to kind of maybe go to you and build my relationship with you, the cats, and convince some of your soldiers to come over here with me and ransack this thing, and then I'll get the secret item from this like mm-hmm. mine or whatever.
And that's part of the best part of an Inindo is finding like interesting items.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I wish there were more of them.
Right.
So
it's, I think that idea of that, there is a real kind of interesting hook mm-hmm. that has not really been pursued very often in mm-hmm. any medium, I think, mm-hmm. Where you're just essentially have an entirely different agenda than everybody else. Even in Inindo, it's all like NPCs, but everybody else,
everybody has an agenda.
They're all doing their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a super fun idea. And I think it's probably also why the first time MMOs were coming out, that was a really fun premise. Like, oh, I'm like in a real living world here. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to pull off. But I mean, Inindo was probably the first time where it occurred to me that you could play a game in what felt like a real world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I think about Koei, like we said, like, how could you make an Inindo board game, or like what's similar in the board game space? What I find interesting about Koei is they are essentially a board game company, or were up until the Dynasty Warriors moment.
Right.
Like, that's where everything changes for Koei. Like, their story literally changes that.
They got away from simulation.
Yeah. They still do it, but it's a substantially smaller part of their business. Mm-hmm. It's not where the profit is. What's interesting about Koei is on paper, that era, the first era of Koei before Dynasty Warriors, when they were doing all these strategy games, they should work as board games. Like, they're like, right. Okay, well, it's very much a board game. I think that's why we like them so much, because mm-hmm. you're just playing a board game. Like mm-hmm. when you play Romance of the Three Kingdoms 2, you're just playing a board game where all the math is taken care of for you. And you can play it by yourself if you want to. You don't have to deal with some sort of fiddly, like, automata machine solo board game thing. You just play it. But it's weird because they're so complex that it would be really hard to make it a board game. Like that's what Koei does, is like board game plus.
Yeah.
Because like every game they've done in that sort of Kou Shibusawa era, it's all like just too complex to translate to. Like, because if I had to make an Inindo board game, I'd like go, well, you'd have to kind of just pick one of the ingredients, like wandering around Japan building relationships, or maybe the god mode of daimyo. But now you're doing the Nobunaga's Ambition board game, not the Inindo one. So
yeah, and as soon as you're cutting off aspects here, I think you're all of a sudden losing that sort of perfect combination of chocolate and peanut butter that Inindo has, of these kind of unique elements being brought together. So it is super tricky. Like, I think maybe this might be a better topic for a different day, where we dive into what distinguishes, what can a video game do better than a board game, and vice versa. Because I think that's what this show is all about, really. Like where we even started, because that's like going back to our old episodes. It's kind of the space we dwell in, is where it's like that part of the Venn diagram is in the middle, where it's like, well, is this better at a board game, or is this better as a video game? Yeah. So I think it'd be really kind of fun to try to figure out, especially like Inindo is such a unique game, but to try to figure out, like, how could you scratch a similar itch? And you would have to offload a lot of that kind of processing power of the video game onto the players themselves. And that's why Root is an interesting example to me, because it has the players basically exist as the daimyos in that example. So you probably would have to kind of change some of the roles and responsibilities, but you could potentially still have a game where everybody's existing in this sandbox of competing interests and agendas, and everyone's going about it their own kind of way. And
we should try and like pull that into our Trenthia project, really. Like, eventually just try and make cherry pick the stuff we love.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I kind of wanted to restart doing the podcast, was like, we just sit and dream.
Well, I mean, Shining Force might be another good game to kind of dive into too, because it also does the thing where you walk around and there's this, the story element, there's an RPG element, but the combat is very tactical, skirmish style, which is a huge appeal for me.
Deal. Let's do it.
Yeah. All right, there we go.
All right. So next episode, we'll talk about Shining Force.
And 2?
I don't know.
We can talk about it both.
Well, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
We could do both. We could do one or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was cool to podcast again. Wow. Look at this. Microphones and stuff.
Shake off the dust.
Ugh. Dusty. Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Who cares?